Yeah,
So
and this is so,
yeah,
to me, this is so interesting. If there are two camps, right? So one more functional and the other one, as you said, more qualia-based, maybe related to IIT. There's also this philosophical distinction that seems to go hand in hand with that, where what you just said would be a drastic change in how, thinking about science also, right? Because it's n equal 1. There's only one observer. That's you yourself. And how important that may be for science. I share
right.
totally, I share your sentiment. But I think that is why there's this divide, that functionalists, they want to have the third person perspective exclusively. And so I see exactly like you that we're approaching first person n equals 1 science. And I do not see why this wouldn't be science. I do not see the problem.
Yeah, in fact, that was actually a great point, and we discussed quite a bit. One day before the conference, actually, 2 days before, with Johannes Kleiner and also Kobe.
Oh yes, yeah,
Somebody.
yeah, I know
Do
Kobe.
you know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes, yeah.
mathematician.
Yeah.
And then we had a quite a good discussion about this, and then I was saying basically that thing that you are saying right now, that we do need an first person science, and he was initially saying, at least, that is impossible because science has to be general or generalizable, right? And then my argument has been that science is something that should start from everything. Every state, every event are completely different in the first case, but we admit that some aspect of the things are critical, and the other things we discard as an sort of as an irrelevant difference. And then we start to kind of form a class of the different events. Like these are, from the beginning, like, in terms of molecular configuration or the time or space of the things that's happening, it's all different. Like even the psychophysics wise, when you are trying to say that, this green is same as this green, it's already different in time or space. But because we are not interested in that, we categorize this green and then this green as the same green, right? And then once we do that, we kind of try to find some laws or functions or arrows or morphism or whatever that makes a prediction about what we want to predict about this. And this arrow is previously thought to be very, very exact, causal, deterministic, and unless it is not scientific. That was a very prevailing kind of thought of the science, and that also permeates even now as a chauvinism of the kind of physics, right? Physics can give exact explanation all the time, and however, biology or psychology cannot. And then this, grouping is super arbitrary in the sociology and psychology and things like that, and then it's always statistical from here to here, and that's not science. I also used to think about that before. But if you go down at the end of the quantum mechanics or quantum theory, indeed, even at the bottom, this choice of the class that you consider is in a sense subjective, up to scientists, and also this is not a deterministic one-to-one kind of correspondence. At the statistical level, we can make an inference about that, but at each of these things, how does it actually go from here to there is just impossible to determine. And that's what I have learned over the last several months of the quantum theory kind of learning. And once you accept all of this, right, which is founded, which is consistent across all the science, and so including this quantum science, then you start to also realize that, you know, what you are experiencing as a particular person here, like Alex or me here, you know, it's the same thing, right? Basically, you know, within me, if I consider this different state and the different memory and then make a prediction, and then if it works, it's all right. And then, you know, that may not be consistent with Alex's version of the, you know, this experience, but within this, you know, class of the things that are different even for me to make some coherent and so useful prediction, that's already a theory and a scientific kind of, you know, theory. So n equal 1 or 2 doesn't really matter.
This is awesome. I like that. This should be a paper. This is interesting. Okay. I had a similar discussion with Johannes and Kobe, and my take was different. And I don't know if I told you before. So I had this thought experiment where I said, let's imagine that it's, you know, like an I Am Legend in a movie where everybody's dead and only one person survives. And it's Will Smith. And so let's say that Will Smith, that one person that survives, is an excellent scientist. And so it's an interesting movie because if there's no other person on the planet, it's a really boring life. You have nobody to interact with, and, you know, you can read some old books or whatever. But let's say this is a great scientist, and that scientist makes breakthroughs and, you know, unites relativity and quantum physics and does everything that we're hoping science will do. And but so since it's only one person, it's by definition, there's no more need for a third person science. There's no papers, that nothing has to be written down. It can all be done in the mind of this one person, right? So it could be first person only science. And
but that is reproducible, and so that makes a prediction and explanation.
Well, it doesn't even have to be reproducible, right? Because Einstein's theory of relativity became famous overnight with n equals 1. He said, you know, if you go and you look at a solar eclipse, you should see a star behind the sun because the light bends around the sun. So they took one photograph, they saw that, and Einstein got famous overnight. That's n equals 1. It's physics. It's accepted. So you can combine that. You can say it's a single person doing science, and it could be first person perspective only, and it could even be n equals 1, something like this Einsteinian event. And we would still accept that to be science, right? So there's no more need for third person science if there's no other people around, because you can't communicate. And so since we still seem to think that this is science, then it's kind of weird to say that science should be third person perspective only in the first place, right? If you say, well, look, this person would only do science, even if it's the last person, the only person on the planet, the last person on Earth, this person would only do science if the person is still doing third person science, third person perspective stuff. It still seems weird. Like, if there's no other person around to share with, not now, not in the future, why would there be need for third person science, right? Like, this person could learn whatever that person wants to learn just on the first perspective, and that's fine. There's no more need to share. There's nobody else. So why would you insist on something that for which there's no more practical need? So for me, that really shows that, yeah, there could be first person science and first person falsification, right? You know, the simple statement, will there be life after death? That's a hypothesis, and it can be falsified. So if you would die in a minute and then you realize you wake up somewhere else, there's life after death, well, that was, you just basically tested a hypothesis, and, you know, you realize, oh yeah, there's life after death. You wouldn't say that, no, I need more than one n. That's not sufficient. I don't believe there's life after death. And it's first person perspective only as well. You'd be like, wow, yeah, look at this. I died, and now things keep going, right? So that shows that there's no reason to call something like this unscientific, right? So that shows that n equals 1 and first-person science is totally acceptable, at least to me, for one person, right? You still might have the problem that if you do the experiment that you said before, where you manipulate your brain and you test your own consciousness against prediction of the theory, that experience has to be done by every scientist individually. It might still be hard to communicate that. But for one scientist who just wants to know the truth and just wants to test a theory, that's sufficient, right? You don't learn anything extra by then sharing that knowledge with other scientists.
Yeah, I probably understand what you are trying to say, but there is a potentially, one component that I didn't actually explain to this, which is the importance of the context or background kind of, condition or assumption. And including this, context or background assumption, this n equal 1, science is just a part of the more grandiose theory. That's how I see it. So it's not possible for somebody to just claim random thing as n equal 1 as a theory that is valid, because it's just incoherent with other things. But this coherence condition is not a very, so to speak, intuitive kind of the coherence condition, like a Bell inequality case and also logical possibility case of the Escher's stairs or Penrose's diagram, Penrose's triangle and things like that. There are cases where when you are looking at the local structure of the universe and the local structure of the phenomenology, it is consistent within that. But when you try to paste this with other kind of perspective or other theory, then suddenly, this part is really consistent, but this part and this part is just turns out to be inconsistent. And this happens because this part of the universal observation is valid when you look at the things from here, the perspective or effect of the observation changes the nature of the thing that you observe here. And there is no single unified God perspective that explains this and this at the same time from somewhere else, This is a kind of the previous view of the science, right? Like, even though, and I just wanted to make a distinction about, this view, which I think is a view that is consistent with the quantum theory and, what I'm thinking about n equal 1 kind of thing. And this is a sort of classical scientific view that, everything has to be coming from this viewpoint that applies to everything.
So you're going as far to say that ontologically, the reality could be incoherent because depending on the perspective, what you drew below, it's not a feature of the observer. It's a feature of reality that you can get global incoherence.
Right.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
And that's not only psychological facts or sociological facts, but also for the quantum level as well. And the Hayato Saigo once told me this, example, which is very, memorable and surprising to me, which is that the electron moving into this direction with the speed of light, right? And then because the electron is moving, there is some kind of electromagnetism, observed in the perpendicular direction of this, electrical flow, right? However, if the hypothetical observer is moving together with this, electron at the same speed in the same direction, then electron is supposed to be static. And if this is not moving, then there shouldn't be also, magnetic field. And that means that, even something that is super fundamental, I mean, at least I thought that was one of the fundamental things in the physics at that time, is also observer dependent. So that relativity exists, relativity affects on even the concept of what exists. Right? And something like this also happens at the level of other, quantum things, and not only that, also, depending on how you consider things are operating at certain time or scale or boundary, you also need to think about what is true about that system. It's very abstract way of saying, but I think in the end, at each different kind of perspective, there is a coherent explanation about why they are like that. But once you change that perspective, then that explanation may be just incoherent to each other. So for example, at the level of politics, right? Like liberals or Democrats, the liberals and also conservatives, they may say things completely logically, valid things, 100%. And there's no contradiction within it, at all, based on their context and belief. There's absolutely just no, contradiction within that power thing. And then same goes for the other side as well. But once you try to get to this viewpoint and then claim that, my viewpoint is actually this one, or my viewpoint is this one, then it's just impossible from the, the logical kind of structure of the things, I think.
Yeah, so in this case, the actual interesting case is then, it's almost the other way around, is the third person perspective, right? It is the fact that science usually seems to produce a God's view.
Yes,
that
exactly.
Even though we have all of these individual perspectives, most of the time it seems to cohere.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah. And that's the kind of the thing that I'm starting to get to these days, especially starting to think about the language and the consciousness. We are, from the consciousness or qualia kind of space-wise, we are probably different in each case, right? Probably because the wiring in the brain is slightly different. What you see as similar may not be similar to me, in the exact way. But it doesn't matter, because we are trying to make some kind of third person, like an agreeable kind of thing based on this, what we share. And then we project this very high dimensional, super complicated kind of, conscious experience into a very low dimensional, simple world of the words. That is, also, in the text, it's very linear, right? There's also much less freedom. Even though, once we read the things, how to unpack it in our imagination is completely, again, inconsistent within each other. But as long as, coming from here to there is nearly, consistent, we can get going, we can converse, and we can cohere. And the extreme version of this has been science so far. And in many cases, this is really powerful and very, useful. But there are also cases where this idea of the, God view just doesn't exist, or creates more problem than it solves.
Yeah. How do you mention monism? How do you see that fit in?
So in my opinion, this is probably close to the monism. That this supremacy of the first person view, but also I don't think this view is a solipsism. because solipsism is just less powerful in explaining what's going to happen in the hypothetical scenario. So, for example, what you said about life after my death, right? Depending on how you define the death, I think future scientists, or actually, that kind of the anesthetics is effectively a death, right? And then if you define death in that way, at least let's say, if you go back to 15th century or something, if you do this, you are functionally dead. And then do you agree or not? And then, if you don't have any kind of, recovery drug, you do die at that time of the, day. But two years later or something like that, the scientists discovered this particular procedure that brings you back to consciousness entirely. And that is a kind of scientific discovery of life after the death, in fact, experimentally. And that you should be able to, explain with this, kind of framework. Of course, this one so far cannot, explain life after the death of, maybe, my age of 140 years or something. But in some way, if, IIT-like theory preserve or extends my consciousness after my body death, it's plausible that I can actually observe the universe in some way, right? And then come back to give me back some kind of physical body to interact it again and with the world. So even that kind of limitation may be broken. So I don't know. But having said that, this perspective that what we see is primary, and it may be inconsistent with the others. I think this is all consistent with what we know about physics. And
I mean, there's two
needs to explain this.
I mean, there's two things for me that come to mind. I mean, one is, and again, I think I see that maybe in the two consciousness camps, right? That the epistemic instinct is that what I know the most certain is that I'm conscious. Everything else is conjecture. And so that it's interesting that lots of philosophy of science seems to put it the other way around. That no, it's the abstract third person thing, like you're assuming the space and time and other people, all of that was actually conjecture. It becomes the most undoubtable thing, right? That there's corpuscular matter and all of this stuff. And so that, but epistemically, it's obviously the other way around. So what you know is what you know. And but at the same time, and this is, I think, where a lot of this leads to what is interesting is that you can just, with your own mind, you can sit in the armchair and you can find out a lot about the world without even observing anything about the world, right? So logic, mathematics, a lot of this seems to be almost inside of you. And at the same time, that's where we seem to cohere the most. So if you talk to other people, where you maybe see the least incoherence is when we do mathematics. That's where we seem to easily agree the most. And then it's almost the same when we have an interaction with nature, right? So if we really observe nature and try to understand nature, in the end, we just end up with mathematics and mathematical laws. So despite what you just said, that you could have these extreme individual viewpoints, there seems to be something almost godlike that seems to tie everything together. And whatever mathematics does seems to have a handle on that. This ultimate structure and order of